Paige Rodriguez is passionate about educational freedom. However, educational freedom has come under attack with the advent of Common Core, which imposes a one-size-fits-all set of standards and testing, which will impose uniformity across all public schools, regulated and overseen by the federal government. Paige is working on getting permission to speak at the April PTA meeting at her son's elementary school in order to alert other parents to the problem. She believes that parents should be able to play an active role in their children's education and be able to choose freely from a variety of educational options, free from interference from the federal government. Her speech today is called Why Common Core Must Be Defeated. And as Charlie pointed out, we will be participating and representing the PTA meeting, and her goals are to persuade us otherwise. Paige Rodriguez, Why Common Core Must Be Defeated.
Thank you, Russ. It's daunting as a layperson and a parent to stand up here in front of you and try to tackle this controversial and frankly very complicated topic, Common Core. How many of you have been feeling confused about what Common Core even is? I was too. I think that by now, most parents of school-aged children have at least heard of Common Core, and many of us have already seen manifestations of it in our children's homework, particularly in math. And I think that we are becoming increasingly aware that next year, our children will be tested under a new system called PARCC, P-A-R-C-C. This stands for Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers. This test is designed to be the enforcement mechanism for Common Core to assess whether our children are meeting the standards. Now, but what exactly is Common Core? The claim of Common Core proponents is that Common Core is a set of rigorous, college and career-ready standards for a 21st century global economy. Now, the purpose of education, they tell us, is to ensure that our children meet these standards so that our nation can compete in the global economy. Now, this definition strikes me personally as being a shallow and uninspired perspective on the higher ends of education. But that aside, I think we can all agree that we want rigorous standards in our schools, and that by the time our children graduate from high school, we certainly want them to be college and career ready. And we know that many of our schools are failing to do this. So what's the problem? Why am I here raising concerns about Common Core? I'm concerned that Common Core represents a sea change in the very structure of American education. As a top-down system, it runs counter to our idea of local control in education. And as a one-size-fits-all solution, it will deny parents the opportunity to choose the type of education they feel is appropriate for their particular children. Now, the first of many striking features of Common Core is how quietly it appeared on the scene, like a mushroom in the night. I would have expected that something as transformative and far-reaching as Common Core would have generated much discussion and debate, but instead it arrived on the scene largely unannounced. How is this? Could there be some guile involved? We can begin by asking, who exactly is the they who developed Common Core? When Common Core first emerged on the scene a few years ago, proponents claimed, with some amount of guile, I believe, that the development of Common Core was a state-led effort, the brainchild of state governors and chief state officers of education. After all, state and local districts have traditionally held the reins of public education, And it might make sense for them to get together and share best practices to improve education in their own states. But when you look at the actual history of Common Core, you realize that this is simply not true. It turns out that one of the primary masterminds behind the idea of Common Core is the current president of the College Board, David Coleman, who is also influential in Washington, D.C. Now, if you read articles on Common Core, you will now see him referred to as the chief architect of Common Core. In your handout that you all should have, there is a link to a speech he gave last year to the Harvard Graduate School of Education's Strategic Data Project Symposium, in which he takes credit for being a part of a small group of people who conceived of Common Core, apparently on the back of a napkin. Now, taking the lead from David Coleman and his group, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, in turn, is one of several private organizations which have invested millions of dollars in developing the Common Core standards, as well as buying the support of other smaller organizations around the country to promote the idea of Common Core. Here we see a philanthropic urge conveniently paired with an entrepreneurial urge to generate a market for Common Core textbooks, computer testing systems, and software for a captive audience. Now, the basic idea of Common Core is that every child will be required to meet specific educational benchmarks at the same time, at the same age, and everyone will take the same set of tests. It is basically a one-size-fits-all solution to education for every child in our public school system. There is little or no escape because it applies to all public schools who receive some amount of federal funding. So unless you can afford to attend a private school, you're stuck. Gone is the idea of the states as autonomous laboratories of democracies. Now, at the heart of Common Core is data collection. If you watch David Coleman's speech, you will witness his unbridled enthusiasm for the ability of data to solve all of our ills. This data collection enterprise involves an expansion of the Department of Education's current K through 12 purview of our educational system to something called P through 20. Has anyone heard of P through 20? Maureen has. Basically, P stands for preschool or pre-K. Then you have the usual K through 12. 13 through 16 is college, and 17 through 20 is your first 4 years in the labor force. The Department of Education calls this the cradle to career data system. The data is sent on our children is sent to a federal clearinghouse where it can be shared with researchers and vendors, as well as other federal departments, including the Department of Labor, Department of Health and Human Services, and the Office of Criminal Justice. Our children are basically being bureaucratized without their consent. In my opinion, their privacy is being violated. How did the states take the bait and adopt Common Core and all that it entails? What guile was involved? Colorado is one of the 45 states which signed on to Common Core largely as a result of our competing for federal stimulus money and race to the top. As a condition for even applying for these grants, states were required to sign up for Common Core and to establish longitudinal data systems to track every child. Page 2 on your handout has details on this. So as you can see, Common Core is far from being a state-led initiative. Cash-strapped states adopted Common Core as a condition for receiving federal money. In fact, the Common Core was scarcely off the press before being adopted, and I understand that some states adopted it sight unseen. At the public hearing in Colorado, the supporters of Common Core were by and large organizations that had money in the game and who had been given cash either directly or indirectly by the Bill Gates Foundation. Now, why haven't we heard more about this? Derek Anderson, who's the principal of a highly successful charter school in Fort Collins, who feels like Common Core is going to undermine the autonomy of his school, said, those who were in the know and could have and should have said something, said nothing. Now there is an increasing amount of information online as we find out more about this takeover of our schools. I highly recommend Dr. Peg Luxick's presentations. Her information are listed on your handouts. If you want some insight into the actual issues of curriculum content, I recommend Dr. Terrence Moore's book, The Story Killers, also listed in the handout. I have brought some copies with me if you would like to have one to take home. If this information makes you uncomfortable, it's not too late to do something about it. Last week, the chair of the Colorado State Board of Education made an announcement that he's going to ask the board to recommend to overturn the testing. If you're as worried as I am, I hope you'll consider contacting our representatives. Our children deserve better. Thank you. Yeah, I have the Q&A.
I'm going to shake her hand and then say,
yeah. Do you have any questions, Brad?
Hey, great presentation. I have always been told by instructors, teachers, that there are three ways to learn: through visual, through audio, and through kinesthetic. How does Common Core address a child's ability to learn based on those three ideas?
That's a very good question. I am not sure about the specifics about how the standards are implemented. I am assuming that a teacher is still free to use a variety of methods, whether they be kinetic or audio or visual. Apparently 85% of people are visual learners, but then you have 15% who learn in other ways. So I think that may be an independent question, the actual methods of teaching these standards. I think teachers probably have flexibility in that. Now, as far as the testing goes, that will be uniform for everybody. So everyone will definitely have to be able to, apparently it's going to be computerized. They'll have to be able to use a screen and look at that visual data and work online to take the tests. Yeah, Charlie?
I want my child to go to college. And it looks to me like it would be a great idea if the federal government comes in and makes sure that my child is prepared to go to college. Why doesn't the Common Core help that?
Well, the claim of the Common Core is that going through this system of standards will enable your child to go to college. The dirty little secret is that what they're really aiming for with these standards is community college. So if community college is what you have in mind, then that is what the standards are aimed for. So they're going to be inadequate for, a 4-year college. So that's something as a parent you should be aware of. Just because your child is passing the test doesn't mean that they're actually ready for a more expansive college degree. There. Al?
I would like to know what the government is going to do with all this longitudinal data they're collecting. It sounds to me like what they're really doing is creating jobs for party members to sit there at high salaries and read all of this data and maybe decide who they can persecute and who they need to re-educate in camp somewhere and regimentation in short.
Yeah, that would be part of the problem. And, our children have not been consulted as to whether 20 years down the line, when they're in the level 19 of the P through 20 system, if they really want to have that information. We tell our children, be careful what you text and what you post online, because it's there forever. And, once this data is collected on your child, it's out there. And, they say that it's private and for educational use only, but it's out there. Steve?
So, Paige, I'm not so concerned about the collection of data, because the government's already collecting a ton of data on us today anyway. NSA is recording all of our phone calls, so they know more about my kid. I have a general concern because it seemed like this was just put together in a kind of a slapdash way. There are different, kind of going back to Brad's comment, there are different pedagogical methods out there. My wife's a Montessori teacher. By training, our kids have gone to Montessori schools. There's the Waldorf method. There's the old look-say versus phonetic way of learning to read and write. What standards such as these that have been proven to be effective in producing results in teaching children are underneath the Common Core?
Well, unfortunately, the Common Core has not been tested, and if there's a lot of information that you can look for online with evidence that, you know, it is truly an untested system. In fact, the standards for K through 3 are highly suspect because the big panel that created the standards didn't even have teachers from kindergarten through 3rd grade as, you know, consultants. So yeah, it's a big problem. There, I think I'm.
Okay.